Welcome to the discussion. My guest today is Alex Rice, the co-founder and chief technology officer at HackerOne. Alex, welcome to the program.
Yeah, great to be here, Jason.
Let me set just a little context for our discussion. The Defense Department launched the first Hack the Pentagon in spring of 2016. That's almost 5 years ago, believe it or not. The success of this crowdsourced approach to cybersecurity led DoD to establish its first vulnerability disclosure policy, which created a safe, secure, and legal avenue for private citizens worldwide to report vulnerabilities found on public-facing DoD websites and applications. It also served as a bridge between DoD and the security research community to work openly and in good faith together to identify and disclose vulnerabilities. Second, it led to the expansion of this idea of a good hacker approach to cybersecurity across the military services and into the federal civilian world. From bug bounty programs to vulnerability disclosure programs, or VDPs, agencies are seeing the value of these approaches to securing networks and applications. So much so that the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, issued a binding operational directive in September requiring every civilian agency to publish a vulnerability disclosure policy as a public web page. The deadline for that, if I got this correct, if I counted my months correctly, Alex, was March. It's unclear how many met that requirement, but whether or not they met the deadline or not, it doesn't really matter. The benefits of these approaches are clear. DoD by itself has held 14 public and 10 private bug bounty programs and paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars in response to private sector experts finding problems. So how can agencies take advantage of these crowdsourced cybersecurity programs? Well, that's where my guest comes in. Alex Rice is the co-founder and chief technology officer at HackerOne. Now, Alex, I gave a little bit of a preview of what we're talking about, but let's dive down just the next level. When we talk about good hackers helping to secure applications and networks, what does that really mean?
Oh, Jason, I think Hollywood has really given hackers a bad rap, and everyone's got that mental image of someone in a dark hoodie in their dank basement. And what we really mean by hacker is we're trying to pay homage to the MIT's original definition of the term, and they define it as anyone who enjoys the intellectual challenge of finding a creative way to bypass a limitation. When you apply that broad lens to it, there's millions of folks out there that fit that description. Many of us included. The vast majority of them have no criminal or immoral inclinations whatsoever, and that skill set can provide a lot of value to all aspects of technology and cybersecurity. And what these programs do is it tries to remove some of the stigma around hacking, to paint it in a positive light and let organizations benefit from the knowledge rather than the criminal act.
Right. We all see Enemy of the State, the Will Smith movie from the mid-90s, and thinks that the satellites are everywhere and they're tracking every move. Let me just dig just a little bit deeper. So these are people who are researchers. These are folks like yourself, HackerOne employees, good hackers. And they are people who have a certain set of skill sets, right, and expertise that can help agencies find these vulnerabilities that they don't know already exist.
That's exactly right. It's a diverse community of folks from various backgrounds that participate in finding security flaws in software in both incentivized and unincentivized manners. For example, we ran one of the early bounty programs with the Air Force, Hack the Air Force, had about 130 participants in it. The top participant from that program was a sophomore in high school at that period of time. Perfectly capable of hacking the Air Force as he demonstrated, but normally wouldn't be given that opportunity in a traditional vetted environment. Like the vetting criteria for a traditional Air Force penetration test meant that without these types of programs, you're missing out on that creativity, that perspective, that diversity, and it is a strong complement to the other activities that go into securing that attack surface.
I think that's a key piece there. It's a compliment. And we're going to get to that maybe a little bit later in the discussion.
Very much so.
It's not just a be all end all. Let's talk about how the process works a little bit. And specifically, let's focus on the digital supply chain. There's a lot of discussion around supply chain security. We can mention those 4 letters, CMMC, that everyone is really worried about. But let's talk more broadly about how this approach can help address potential vulnerabilities in the supply chain?
Absolutely. So, one of the side effects of the DoD in particular launching these programs is the scope of the Defense Department's vulnerability disclosure policy was anything that could impact the mission in their public facing internet assets. And over the last 5 years, they've had north of 10,000 vulnerabilities identified through that. And upon a deep, closer look, it turns out a large percentage of them are from the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, from suppliers and contractors of all sorts of cyber and IT services to the Department of Defense. And so, if you're asking the public to assess your attack surface, it's unheard of these days that it doesn't involve some element of the supply chain. And particularly when you're asking hackers to do that, um, it often doesn't make any sense to say, well, we'd love you to hack us here, but please don't look over here, or please don't find any vulnerabilities in this particular one because it's a contractor and it's not ours, right? Like that sense just does not make sense. Your adversaries don't behave that way, and we try to structure these programs so that the good hackers don't behave that way as well. Just a little over a month ago, the Department of Defense expanded their vulnerability disclosure policy to cover the DIB as well. So now they've explicitly set up a structure where anyone in the DIB can opt into including themselves in the DoD's overall vulnerability disclosure policy. Within the first week, there were over 50 participants and a few dozen vulnerabilities identified in the DoD's supply chain. And it goes to show that this approach works across the most diverse attack surfaces out there.
Walk me through a little bit about how this works, because and we'll pick on Lockheed Martin since they're big and easy to pick on, right? If they say, okay, we're going to tell you it's this specific network we're going to put into the program, or how does it work?
Yeah, in this case in particular, we're talking about vulnerability disclosure policies, which they don't provide any bounties, they don't provide any monetary incentive to go hack. It's purely a see something, say something policy. It says to every ethical, friendly hacker out there, if you find a security flaw in DoD's information systems, we want to know about it. And that tends to have a very broad scope, right? It's not explicitly saying hack these things. But one of the things that was out of scope for the history of that program was the contractors, right? The DoD was not authorizing you to go test third-party networks. It was simply saying, or the DoD owned networks. And this expansion goes out to that. But because the DoD is not in a position to authorize testing against their Lockheed Martin's network, for example, it's an opt-in program at this point. So members of the DIB can opt in to be included in that overall policy, and the ones that have already seen results from it. Lockheed Martin, I believe, operates their own vulnerability disclosure policy independently, which means that's exactly what we're trying to get to. Is if you see a vulnerability in any of these networks, no matter who it belongs to, it's safe to say something.
When we talk about the DIB then opting in, it's saying to them, we will, if you're a good hacker, will allow you to within certain possibilities, certain parameters, look at our network to find potential vulnerabilities. Like, I'm just trying to get to the point of like, how does it work?
I think I would I'd say it even a little broader than that. If you're a member of the DIB, hackers have absolutely found vulnerabilities in your information systems. Whether they were just casually scanning the internet or somebody stumbled across it, somebody somewhere has found a vulnerability in your system. The question is, do you want to know about it? Do you have a channel for them to tell you about it? And today, for the vast majority of the DIB, those channels don't exist. If you or I find a vulnerability in one of those systems, by whatever means we find it by, there's no way to get it to someone who can actually do something about it. That's what this program aims to solve, is hackers find vulnerabilities in your attack surface every single day. If you don't give them a clear and safe channel to notify you, they won't notify you.
Okay. That's actually really helpful, because, we think about these approaches like hack the fill in the blank, And you think, oh,
That's
I'm
right.
allowing them on my network, I'm allowing them to look for certain things. But what you're saying is this in many ways is just creates a line of communication that maybe wasn't there for before as a start, and then it can kind of grow from there.
That's right. Probably if I'm conflating some topics here, because they're really close to each other. The concept of a vulnerability disclosure policy, which is that see something, say something policy, and then these very deliberate bounty programs, which say, please, we want more of this. We want you to hack the Air Force or hack the Army or hack this, and we'll reward you for it specifically. In those type of engagements, there's very specific rules of engagement on what you can hack, what you should look for, and how you'll be rewarded, incentivized for that.
All right. Well, thanks for clarifying that. I think that's really helpful for people who maybe aren't have heard of these approaches, but maybe aren't as familiar with them. One of the things about these approaches, like the hack the or the bug bounty or the VDP type of programs, is they can be used not just for a network or a public facing website, but they also can help you with your security around cloud, DevSecOps, and other digital transformation efforts. Walk me through how they play a role in with those digital transformation efforts.
That's exactly right. So once you have your vulnerability disclosure policy set up, which is a good best practice, and that's is what you referenced earlier with CISA's binding directive, and you'll immediately see value of that. But you don't have a lot of control over what hackers are looking at or why. And so you might ask yourself, what else can hackers do? Where else can they add value? And that's where the majority of the work that HackerOne does, and where these structured bounty programs come into play. In those situations where it's using the same hackers, but with a much more structured engagement and specific vetting criteria for them. So our customers will come to us with an example of, we'd like to get some of the best hackers out there to test this particular asset or this particular application. And those programs are set up so that they incentivize a pay for poor performance model that allows you to reward hackers based on what they actually find and what they actually succeed at, rather than filling up their time with um, the usual fluffy reports that we're used to in those types of engagements. You're paid if you're actually able to have and demonstrate impact. And what that means is we end up recruiting a very diverse and very talented group of folks to perform in these types of engagements. You're able to get specialists that are specialized in one particular piece of it that might not be able to participate to run a classic assessment against it because they're very specialized in a particular area. You get that diversity in these programs is instead of having a few guys in a traditional engagement model, you can have a very refined, best of the best talent engaged in a pay for performance model that just complements the existing structure that you've been doing, but always delivers something that those traditional approaches missed.
One of the things that is obvious when you talk about the specialists is if you're talking about cloud, you can probably bring in people who really understand cloud security. If you're bringing in DevSecOps or you bring in a specific application, that's really the benefit you're talking about here versus, well, I'm a security person, I know security, but I may not be very good at one part of it.
That's exactly right. But also, it's rare that you can find a true external attack surface that is that cleanly divided. Of like, okay, it's just cloud, or it's just this network device, or it's just this type of service. So we come at it from perspective of what is the actual external asset? What is it that your adversaries would be hacking? What is the target? And then you bring together a group of people that can run a comprehensive, holistic simulated attack effectively against that actual thing. So if there's cloud components, we'll have cloud experts. If there's a social component to it, we'll have social engineering experts. If there's a large network component to it or specific crypto components, you'll have those folks involved. And trying to bring that comprehensive team together with a traditional assessment model is prohibitively expensive and impossible in many situations. But it's just by the nature of asking folks to hack stuff through the eyes of a hacker, we end up structuring the programs to mimic what an actual adversary would be targeting.
Alex, a lot more to dig out from that. Let's take a quick break. When we can come back, we can continue our conversation. You're listening to Federal Insights, Understanding the Versatility of Crowdsourced Cybersecurity, sponsored by HackerOne on Federal News Network.